Tayo looked at him with tear-filled eyes and broke down completely. I had a hand in Amara's death, she sobbed. Adewale's face turned pale. What? How? Why would you do such a thing? Through her tears, she explained, she insulted me. She said I shouldn't punish her children until I have mine. Do you know how much that hurt me? After 15 years of trying to have children, after losing our first son just weeks after his birth, her words cut deep. I couldn't forgive her. Every time I saw her happy with her children, it felt like she was mocking me. Adewale sat in stunned silence as she continued. One evening, her children were playing with some other kids. One of them got into a fight with an older boy, and I had to step in to punish them. When Amara saw it, she flared up. She told me to never punish her children again, and to wait for her and her husband to discipline them themselves. That day, I decided I hated her. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That morning, Amara sat in their tiny, dimly lit house, her heart heavy with despair. Her husband, Obinna, sat across from her with his hands on his head, a look of utter helplessness etched on his face. Their 2 children clung to her, their eyes wide with hunger. Amara's belly was swollen with pregnancy, and the pangs of hunger made her feel even weaker. It was December 25th, Christmas Day, but their home was silent and empty. No laughter, no smell of food, just the weight of their collective misery. The pots in the corner of the room were empty, not even a grain of rice left to cook. Obinna had worked tirelessly since January, taking up odd jobs wherever he could find them, but the man who owed him money had been avoiding him for weeks. Each time Obinna went to demand his pay, he was met with excuses. Come today, come tomorrow. That money was supposed to be their survival, their lifeline, but now it seemed like a hopeless dream. The scent of jollof rice and fried chicken wafted through the air, teasing their empty stomachs. Their face me, I face you compound was alive with celebration. Families laughed and chatted as they cooked, fried, and prepared feasts for the day. Amara's heart ached as she heard children running around, their laughter echoing through the walls. She wished for a miracle, just a plate of food to soothe her children's cries and fill her growing baby's needs. We'll go to Big Auntie's house, Obinna finally said, breaking the silence. Big Auntie, who had recently returned from the city, was known for her strictness. She rarely gave money without making people work for it, but they had no choice. It was their only hope. Amara nodded, though deep down she dreaded the idea of being scolded or humiliated. Obinna stepped outside to survey the lively compound. Canopies were set up, music blared, and neighbours handed visitors plates of steaming jollof rice. His heart sank further. Back inside, Amara sat quietly, her hands protectively cradling her belly. She prayed silently for a kind neighbour to remember them, even if it was just a small bowl of rice. Her craving for the food was unbearable, but Obinna had forbidden her from begging. As Obinna stood outside, he noticed one of his friends rushing past. "Where are you off to in such a hurry?" Obinna asked, trying to mask his desperation. "The church down the road is sharing food to celebrate Christmas," the man replied. Obinna's eyes lit up with a glimmer of hope. He rushed back inside and told Amara, "I'll take the children with me. If we all go, we can carry more food." Amara nodded, though she felt uneasy being left alone. "Go quickly," she urged. "The children need to eat." Obinna left with their 2 children, and the house fell silent. As the hours passed, hunger gnawed at Amara's insides. She paced the room, glancing out the window every few minutes, hoping to see Obinna and the children returning. By 4 p.m., her stomach felt like it was twisting in knots. She couldn't bear it anymore. Her Yoruba neighbour, Mama Tayo, had always been kind. Summoning her courage, Amara went to her door. They exchanged warm Christmas greetings, and Mama Tayo, noticing Amara's weary face, went inside and returned with a cooler of rice and chicken. "Take this, my sister," Mama Tayo said kindly. "You need it more than I do." Amara's eyes filled with tears as she thanked her neighbour profusely and hurried back home. She locked the door, placed the cooler on the floor and opened it. The aroma of the rice was intoxicating. She didn't waste time, eating quickly and savoring every bite. The food was so delicious it brought tears to her eyes. Once she was full, she hid the cooler under the bed, fearing Obinna's reaction if he found out she had gone to beg. Exhausted and satisfied, she fell asleep right there on the floor. An hour later, loud knocking startled her awake. Obinna was back, his voice calling from outside. Amara quickly got up, wiped her face and opened the door. Obinna and the children entered, their hands full of food. There were plates of rice, bottles of soda and even a loaf of bread. "See what we got," Obinna exclaimed, his face alight with rare joy. Amara smiled weakly, her guilt hidden beneath her expression. She ate again, not wanting to arouse suspicion though her stomach was already full. The children ate happily, and for a brief moment their home was filled with laughter. That night, as they sat together talking, Amara suddenly started coughing. It was sharp and persistent, and she clutched her chest in pain. "Amara, are you okay?" Obinna asked, his voice laced with concern. She tried to speak, but the pain intensified. She gasped for air, her face contorted in agony, and then she collapsed onto the floor. "Amara!" Obinna screamed, panic overtaking him. The children burst into tears, clinging to their father as he frantically shook her. He ran outside, calling for help, his voice echoing through the compound. Neighbours rushed in, their faces filled with worry. "She needs to get to the hospital," one of them shouted. Obinna lifted Amara into his arms, his heart pounding as tears streamed down his face. The children followed, crying uncontrollably as their mother lay limp in their father's arms. They rushed Amara to the hospital in a desperate attempt to save her life. Obinna sat in the waiting area, his head bowed and his hands clenched together in silent prayer. Though he had never been a religious man, the sight of his wife struggling for every breath had broken him. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "God, please save your daughter. Please don't let her leave me. Her children need her." Hours passed, each minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, the doctor emerged, his face grim. Obinna jumped to his feet. "Doctor, how is she?" he asked, his voice trembling with hope and fear. The doctor sighed deeply. "She's in critical condition. It's food poisoning, and it's progressing very quickly. We're doing all we can, but there's only a 70-30 chance of survival. And I'm sorry to tell you we've lost the baby." Obinna froze, his legs threatening to give way. "The baby?" he whispered, his voice cracking. Anger surged through him as he grabbed the doctor by the collar. "Do something. Save my wife." "Her children need her," he cried, his voice breaking. The doctor gently removed Obinna's hands and looked him in the eye. "We are trying everything we can, but food poisoning works fast. Do you know where she might have eaten something unsafe?" Obinna's mind raced. His thoughts traced back to the previous day. The only food they had eaten was the one from the church. His chest tightened with a mixture of anger and despair. "The church," he muttered. "It has to be the church." The doctor placed a hand on Obinna's shoulder. "We'll keep fighting, but you need to prepare yourself for the worst." The next morning, Amara was gone. Obinna sat beside her lifeless body, holding her hand as tears streamed down his face. His heart felt like it had been ripped from his chest. "Amara, who will care for our children now? How do I go on without you?" he whispered. Their children, Nkem and Chidi, sobbed uncontrollably. "I want Mummy," Nkem wailed, shaking his father's arm. "Bring Mummy back." Obinna held them close, his own tears mixing with theirs. He felt like a shell of a man, hollow and broken. Word spread quickly about Amara's death, and whispers began to circulate about the food from the church. Obinna, consumed by grief and rage, stormed to the church the following day. His face was hardened with anger, his eyes bloodshot. He burst into the compound, shouting, "I want to see the pastor." Church members tried to calm him down. "Brother Obinna, please, this is not the way," one of them pleaded, but Obinna was unstoppable. "You killed my wife," he roared. Who will care for my children now? You fed us poison. The commotion grew louder, drawing a crowd. People tried to hold him back, but he shoved them aside with a strength fueled by grief and fury. The pastor eventually appeared, his face a mixture of shock and confusion. "Obinna, what is the meaning of this?" the pastor demanded. "You killed my wife!" Obinna screamed, his voice echoing through the compound. "The food you gave us, it poisoned her. She's gone because of you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some tried to reason with him, while others looked at the pastor with suspicion. The tension was palpable. The community chief summoned both Obinna and the pastor for a formal hearing. Obinna arrived with his children, their tear-streaked faces a stark reminder of the tragedy. He held up the food packs and nylons they had received from the church as evidence. "This is all we had to eat," Obinna said, his voice shaking. "And now my wife is dead. My baby is gone." The pastor denied the accusations, but the evidence spoke volumes. After thorough investigation and questioning, it was revealed that the food had indeed been contaminated. The pastor was found guilty and arrested. The church community was in shock. Members refused to believe it. "Pastor could never do such a thing," they argued. Others whispered dark rumours. "It's December," one said. Maybe he was trying to renew his powers with a ritual. Back at home, Obinna and his children struggled to cope with their loss. Nkem and Efeoma woke up screaming in the middle of the night, calling for their mother. "I want Mummy," they cried, their small voices filled with anguish. Obinna sat alone, staring at the empty space where Amara used to be. His tears fell freely, but the pain never eased. He missed her laughter, her warmth, her love. Life without her felt unbearable. Though justice had been served, it brought him little comfort. The woman he loved was gone, and his children would grow up without their mother. The weight of it all was almost too much to bear. The following day, a group of church members, led by the pastor's wife, visited Obinna's home. They carried bags of foodstuffs, toiletries, and clothing. Their faces were somber, and their eyes held a mixture of guilt and pity. The pastor's wife stepped forward, her hands trembling as she held out a sack of provisions. "Obinna, please, we're here to apologize for everything. We didn't know the food was contaminated. There must be more to this than we realize. My husband, he's not a murderer. I swear on my life. Please let us help you." Obinna's expression darkened. He stepped out of the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking their entry. "You think I don't see through your schemes? You've come to kill me and my children, just like you killed my wife and baby. Take this forbidden stuff out of my house. Murderers, hiding behind the name of the church." His voice cracked with anger and his tears returned. The pastor's wife gasped, her eyes filling with tears. "Obinna, please, we mean no harm. Let us do our own investigation. Someone is behind this, but it's not us." Obinna picked up the bag she had placed on the ground and hurled it into the street. "I said get out!" he roared. "If I see any of you near my house again, you'll answer to the gods of my ancestors." The visitors left in silence, their heads bowed. The neighbours watched from a distance, murmuring amongst themselves. Back inside the house, Obinna's youngest child, Chidi, sat on the edge of the bed. His small frame was hunched over, his eyes staring blankly at the floor. He hadn't spoken much since the tragedy, and his refusal to eat or engage with his siblings was worrying. He often sat outside watching other children play football, but he never joined them. His thin frame and sunken eyes told the story of his grief. His older brother Nkem, just 12 years old, did his best to cheer Chidi up. He worked tirelessly, running errands for neighbours, washing clothes, and helping wherever he could. Every naira he earned, he spent on small gifts for his brother, a packet of sweets, a small toy, or a plate of jollof rice. One evening, Nkem came home with a piece of puff-puff he had bought from a street vendor. He knelt beside Chidi, who was sitting on the front steps, lost in thought. "Chidi, look what I brought you." "Your favourite," Nkem said, his voice gentle. Chidi turned his head slightly but said nothing. His small hands remained clasped in his lap. Nkem sighed and placed the puff-puff beside him. I know you miss Mummy, I miss her too. But she wouldn't want us to stop living, Chidi. She'd want us to keep going for her. Chidi blinked, his lips quivering. A single tear rolled down his cheek, but he still didn't speak. Later that night, as the family sat in the dimly lit room, Nkem whispered a quiet prayer. God, please help us, help Chidi, help all of us. We're trying, but it's so hard. The days dragged on, but Chidi's spirit remained heavy. The weight of grief hung over the family like a storm cloud, refusing to lift. Despite his best efforts, Nkem could only do so much. After Amara's death, Mama Tayo became a shadow of herself. The once vibrant and lively woman was now consumed by fear and paranoia. Little things startled her. Shadows, sudden noises, even the sound of children laughing. Every time she saw Obinna and his children, their tears haunted her. The cries of Amara's children echoed in her mind, and their sorrow seemed to follow her wherever she went. She became restless, unable to sleep through the night without waking up screaming. Sometimes in the middle of the night she would scream, "Please forgive me." Adewale, her husband, would shake her awake. "Baby, what is it? What's wrong?" he would ask, concern etched on his face. She would stare at him with wide, terrified eyes and whisper, "Can't you see the baby? The baby is here." "What baby?" Adewale would ask, bewildered. Realizing what she had said, she would quickly cover her face and mumble, "It's just sleep paralysis." "It's nothing." But her actions were becoming harder to ignore. She was losing weight, her once thriving business was collapsing, and her vibrant smile had vanished. Adewale knew something was deeply wrong, but she refused to talk about it. One night, Adewale found Mama Tayo sitting in the dark, crying. She was rocking back and forth, clutching her knees and muttering, "Lord, please forgive me." "Take this cup away from me." "What is it? What have you done?" Adewale asked, kneeling beside her. "You've been like this for weeks. Tell me now." Mama Tayo looked at him with tear-filled eyes and broke down completely. I had a hand in Amara's death," she sobbed. Adewale's face turned pale. "What? How? Why would you do such a thing?" Through her tears, she explained, "She insulted me. She said I shouldn't punish her children until I have mine. Do you know how much that hurt me? After 15 years of trying to have children, after losing our first son just weeks after his birth." Her words cut deep. I couldn't forgive her. Every time I saw her happy with her children, it felt like she was mocking me. Adewale sat in stunned silence as she continued. One evening, her children were playing with some other kids. One of them got into a fight with an older boy, and I had to step in to punish them. When Amara saw it, she flared up. She told me to never punish her children again, and to wait for her and her husband to discipline them themselves. That day, I decided I hated her. Her voice dropped to a whisper. On Christmas Day, I saw my chance. I added sniper poison for rats into the food I gave her. I never meant for her to die, I just wanted to hurt her. But now, I can't sleep. I see a baby crawling toward me asking, "Why did you kill my mother?" They want to take my soul, Adewale. They won't let me rest. Adewale was horrified. You mean to tell me you poisoned her? And you've let an innocent man, a pastor, take the blame for it? Mama Tayo nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm a monster, Adewale. I don't deserve forgiveness. Please help me. Don't let them find out. They'll kill me if they know the truth. Adewale was torn. He couldn't believe the woman he had loved and supported for so many years was capable of such evil. But he knew what had to be done. What about the pastor? He was wrongly accused. Don't you think he deserves justice? He asked, looking at Mama Tayo. She couldn't answer. She looked away, ashamed. I don't know what to do, she stammered. You have to confess, Adewale said firmly. You can't keep this secret. Amara's family deserves the truth, and the pastor deserves to be free. Mama Tayo sobbed into her hands. I can't, they'll kill me. Please don't make me do this. Adewale stood up, his face hard with determination. You should have thought about that before you took someone's life. I can't protect you from the consequences of your actions. You need to face the truth. You have 3 days to tell the truth, Mama Tayo, Adewale said one evening, his voice low and stern. They sat in their small, dimly lit living room, the tension between them palpable. Amara's soul will not rest, and neither will you, until you make things right. Her children deserve justice, and the pastor, he doesn't deserve to suffer for something you did. As the days passed, Adewale grew more distant. He stopped eating the meals his wife prepared, muttering under his breath, If she can kill another woman, who's to say she won't kill me next? He watched her closely, his suspicion evident in every glance. Mama Tayo, consumed by guilt and fear, became a shadow of herself. One evening, as she prepared dinner, Adewale stood in the doorway, his arms crossed. Mama Tayo, every passing moment you don't confess makes you more of a coward. What kind of woman poisons another and then hides behind lies? He said, his tone cold. Mama Tayo didn't respond. She couldn't meet his gaze. Deep down, she knew he was right, but the thought of facing the angry community terrified her. That same evening, Chidi and Nkem, Obina's sons, wandered through the village. Their father had been out all day, searching for work, and the boys hadn't eaten anything since morning. Chidi, the younger of the two, was so weak he could barely stand. Nkem, though hungry himself, supported his little brother as they walked. They stopped in front of Mama Tayo's house. Nkem knocked on the wooden door, his small fist trembling. Please, Mama Tayo, he called out, his voice cracking. We just need small Gary to drink. We're so hungry. Inside, Mama Tayo heard their voices. She froze, the guilt in her chest tightening like a vice. Tears welled up in her eyes as she listened to their desperate pleas. One part of her wanted to help, to offer them even a crumb of food, but another part held her back. The weight of her crime paralyzed her, and she couldn't bring herself to move. The boys knocked again, but when no response came, Nkem sighed. Let's go, Chidi. Maybe another neighbor will help us, he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. Mama Tayo watched them from behind the curtain as they walked away, her tears falling freely. I'm a monster, she whispered to herself. That night, Mama Tayo made up her mind. She couldn't stay in the village any longer. The shadows of her actions haunted her at every turn, and Adewale's piercing gaze only made things worse. She decided to run away, to leave everything behind and start anew. As Adewale slept soundly beside her, she packed a small bag with a few belongings. She tiptoed out of the bedroom, her heart pounding in her chest. The night was quiet, save for the distant chirping of crickets. She slipped out of the house and into the cool night air, careful not to make a sound. As she walked through the dark village, her steps quickened. But then, something strange happened. Her vision began to blur, and her breathing grew laboured. She turned around, and in the dim moonlight, she thought she saw a baby crawling toward her. The tiny figure whispered, Why did you kill my mother? Mama Tayo gasped, her chest tightening. She tried to run, but her legs felt like they were made of stone. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts as she clutched her chest. She stumbled and fell to the ground, her cries for help barely a whisper. The night swallowed her final moments, leaving her alone in the darkness. The next morning, a group of security men patrolling the village outskirts found Mama Tayo's lifeless body. They recognized her immediately and alerted Adewale. Adewale arrived at the scene, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. We slept in the same bed last night, he muttered. How can she be dead? As the men explained what they had found, Adewale's heart sank. He knew her guilt had finally consumed her. One important lesson. Harboring hatred only leads to destruction. Forgiveness and honesty are the true paths to healing and peace.